while we were talking about the DevOps conference, Ajay, myself, and a few others, we realized that while the technical focus of a conference is important and extremely valuable, the DevOps community is at this interesting phase, of being beyond a nascent community. It's more than just a flash in the pan, but isn't quite a massive, well-recognized community, at least in India. And we figure that it's at this cusp that it's useful to spend a little time introspecting, maybe, if that's the right word, and looking at our community and what we can do to make sure that events like this and other forums, both extremely local in our offices, in our geographical areas, as well as in our interactions with the larger DevOps community, that these interactions be valuable and fruitful to us, that we get something meaningful out of it. So we figured that we should open, given, like Niranjan said, this is the fourth conference, and we're going to go on to bigger things. And that's why we're doing a meta talk about community itself, largely bouncing off a lot of work I've done with communities over the last few years, some successful, some unsuccessful, and this is almost something that I would have liked to tell myself if I could talk to myself 8 or 10 years ago. So a little bit about me. My name is Sidu. I was the CEO of C42 Engineering. Now I'm still involved, but not full-time, and I run a marriage bureau now. How's that for a contrast? So I help people get married. That's my Twitter, and that's my GitHub. And I've done a bunch of community stuff. Like I said, I'm a founding moderator of Brug. I'm a founding organizer of RubyConf India. I'm a founding member of DevCamp India, which, depending on whom you ask and where you look, either still exists or doesn't. And I've been a part of a lot of other communities. There are so many mailing lists in my Gmail. It's not even funny. So that's about me. So let's get down to a little bit of the nitty-gritty and ask the simple question, why talk about community? Now, community exists at multiple levels. Community exists at this scale. This is a national scale, I would say. We've tried to set up a national event here. There should be, as we get a little later into the day, there should be 140 people in here from across the country. And I'm sure, as based on what I've seen elsewhere, that all of us are a part of smaller communities, local communities, maybe in our office, maybe in our cities, maybe even in our areas if it's big enough. And we're parts of this community in different ways. A lot of us are involved on mailing lists. A lot of us are observers, flies on the wall. Others will step in and drive events. Still others, like all the sponsors here have actually convinced their employers to sponsor events. So we all operate at different levels. And I think it's valuable to take a look at the structure, the system, how tech communities look and feel, who's involved, how do they work, why do they work, and what makes them successful. So the first reason why I'm doing this talk is my opinion that a good tech community is incredibly valuable. It contributes, it's almost a decisive factor in the success of a technology, or for that matter, a philosophy. And I think DevOps is that combination of tech and philosophy, so it's relevant. For me, an excellent example, and I think the DevOps community shares a great deal with this, thanks to Chef and Puppet, is the global Ruby community. If you look at where they were when the real hallmark of Ruby, Rails, came out in 2005, and where they are today, 8 years later, it's been sort of an insane growth track. Maybe Java and PHP are comparable back in the day in terms of the rate of growth and adoption, and the success of the community as being a factor in making change happen. I think it's also worth calling out the fact that at some level, it's easy to assume that community just happens. There is critical mass, maybe there's enough interest and things just start coming together. But that isn't true. And I think this conference is an excellent example. If you just stop and think about it, this isn't going to happen spontaneously. That kind of stops at the level of a 5-person user group meetup, maybe. So, creating a successful community takes a lot of commitment. I know, for example, that between Ajay and Niranjan, they've probably done 40 hours of work at least in the last month towards this conference. You know, it takes commitment, it takes resources, which can mean different things, and I'll dive into that later, but there's the obvious one, which is money. And of course, it takes time. And here I'm not talking about the time it takes to set up a conference. I'm talking about the consistent, dedicated time it takes over a period of years to create a viable community at whatever level you want to talk about, if you're talking about city, company, it doesn't matter. And so, I think it's extremely important to understand what works well, what was good, what was bad about the communities around us, because this helps us replicate that success and helps us do events like this one better and better with each passing year, giving us more in return for the efforts that we put in. But before I go any further, I think there's a caveat to all of this. This entire talk is my opinion. This isn't based on somebody else's PhD thesis. This is just me thinking about what I would have told myself 8 years ago. So take this with a grain of salt. It worked for me in the communities that I've been involved with. I think it applies to the DevOps community, but I've been wrong so often in the past that it's worth calling out. So since I've started with the axiom almost that the point of community is to create value, let's talk about creating value. The obvious question is, why create value? How do we create it? And for whom? So let's deal with the why first. I'm categorizing the problems we face into 4 very broad categories. We have problems that waste our time. We have problems that require us to have unnecessary effort. There are problems which cost us money. And there are problems which are just plain simple entertaining to solve. Now I've put that at the bottom. This isn't any particular, actually it's just ordered by size of the word, but I think the entertainment should have come on top if I was prioritizing. And I think entertainment is one of those things which hackers get. This is what we don't do this stuff because we're thinking of a long-term strategy with 15 tactics in this market size and that breakdown and all that. It's fun. We start because it's fun. And usually we end up saving time, we end up saving effort, and eventually some smart guy somewhere realizes that all of this is ending up saving him money or making him or her money. So this is the why of it, at least in terms of the axes along which we can measure the creation of value. It's also worth calling out, I think, and this is obvious, there are so many good old-fashioned sayings about this, that time and effort equals money or money equals time and effort, whichever way you want to think about it. And obviously we pay for entertainment, so you can convert between the two using some factor. So let's talk about the way this works, right? Who are the entities, so what's the story in all of this? So somewhere a hacker creates something, for one of those reasons, most usually entertainment. Somewhere another hacker has the same problem, even if it's just boredom. Guy is bored, wants something to do. And somewhere, someone is willing to pay for the value that is created. Now these 3 people, these 3 personas, and everybody in between that connects them, this is the community. It's often easy to fall into this mindset of thinking that the hackers are the community. You write the code, he writes the code, she writes the code, these people are the community. But a community is an ecosystem. It isn't just the individuals, and it definitely isn't just the hackers. It is both people, and it is, I think the Wikipedia definition actually says non-living entities. So yeah, companies, economic circumstances. Like a favorite example of economic circumstances that aren't people. If anybody here has read up about why Smalltalk failed, the biggest reason was because somebody failed to realize within the community that the companies that are backing Smalltalk are going into a price war which is making them unviable for everyone else, among other factors, but this was a key contributing factor. So ecosystem is more than just people, it's also environmental factors, businesses, blah. So let's talk a little bit about the ecosystem members that I think are most directly relevant. So obviously we have the hackers, right? You, me once upon a time, and hopefully sometime in the future once I'm done getting people married. Businesses, of course, because they're getting something out of this, and that's why they're sponsoring this conference. Customers, because businesses don't just exist in a vacuum, they're creating value for someone else. That someone is paying them money. They're taking that money and sponsoring this conference, and we're getting to hang out here and talk. So these three roles, personas, entities, however you want to call them, I think are entities that anybody that cares about community should keep an eye on. I think the weightage differs. I think the majority of people in this room are hackers. But I'm sure there is a percentage of people here that have a very, very clear business reason for coming here, not because they want to contribute a patch to Chef or have servers that are pissing them off. So let's talk about, in this context, how a community creates value. Now, a community is a meta entity, right? The value is being created by the hackers, by the businesses. Customers are paying for this. How does the community add to this? Community is helped by moving value around, right? When you talk about saving time, saving effort, making money, getting entertained, the community is a facilitator in the movement of these values among the members of the ecosystem. So let's take a quick look at what this means. You have the hackers, and the hackers will deal with other hackers because, well, it's fun. They get to learn. I know there are a lot of people here who are like, let's see what the current trend in DevOps is, and so on. Then you have customers directly, if someone wants to contract a hacker to build something for them. And you have businesses, which of course are employing us, right? So let's look at businesses. What do businesses get out of hackers? Businesses, of course, are looking to hire. They're looking to hackers to produce open source tools and products, maybe even commercial open source, commercial tools and products, at which point the distinction between a hacker and a business, I think, is a little blurred. And then businesses, of course, are going to customers saying, listen, look, I have this valuable thing, give me money for it, because that's what businesses exist to do. And of course, businesses to businesses, they're doing partnerships or all that B2B stuff. And of course, businesses exist at the end of the day, and this is, I don't know how many people here have a mechanical or a business background, but in your recommended reading, you would have this book called The Goal by a gentleman called Goldratt. Does that ring a bell for anybody at all? So I see a few hands. It's the top 3 books recommended by Jeff Bezos. And I think there's a very important point in that book which we shy away from or we dislike, but I think that's unwarranted. And that thing is very simple. Anybody involved in any part of the chain of a business, whether you're an employee, whether you're upstream like the hackers, or whether you're downstream like the customers, remember one thing. Businesses exist to make revenue and to be profitable, right? And there's nothing wrong with this. That's why they're created. And I think there is a certain degree of stigma towards making money, and I think that's unwarranted because they create a critical, value. For example, like I said earlier, we're able to have this conference largely because people are sponsoring it. So let's look at the last part, the customers. This is pretty straightforward. They contract hackers and they pay businesses money. So, going back and reiterating the point, communities exist to facilitate the exchange or the barter of value among the members of its ecosystem. So now let's talk about facilitating this bartering process a little bit. So I think one of the, and anybody keeping an eye on economics knows this, that trust is everything, right? Bartering depends on trust. You're not going to go and deal with somebody that isn't trustworthy because you just don't know what's going to happen. And trust in turn depends on reputation. And a valuable community facilitates the tracking of the reputation of its members. And this is one of those really subtle, nuanced aspects of community that gets missed, in my opinion, all too frequently. Now, being able to point to a member of your community and say, this person is good or great or dependable, or this business is a consistently dependable source for rooms for a meetup. You know, something as simple as that. These things really matter. You don't think about it consciously, but it's there in the back of your mind. Reputation is a very, very intrinsic aspect of human society. We're judging reputation constantly. And being aware of this when you're part of a community and being aware that this matters, I think goes a long way towards enhancing the community. And reputation exists through multiple means. I think there's digital reputation. We're very well aware of this, where you have, transitive sources that you can go check for your reputation. You have how many, recommendations did this guy get on LinkedIn? How many repos on GitHub have been forked? You know, how many people are watching Reddit? How many upvotes for this? I mean, you know how this goes. And this is just a snapshot. There are a bunch of other sources as well. And then there is the more simple, good old-fashioned personal reputation. Right? What opinion do we have of each other? You've met me. You've heard me talk. What do you think about me? Somebody's going to ask you at some point, and you're going to give them an opinion. And you'd be surprised at, exactly how much of the world moves on this very simple fact. Something I'm really realizing in the marriage business as well, for those of you that have gone through the process. So these two aspects, plus a few other fuzzier, vaguer aspects together, will contribute to the reputation of the community as a whole, right? So I don't know how many of you guys were watching this or observed this, but the Rails community at one point had a reputation for building slow software, right? It just happens. And the interesting thing about the reputation of a community is it's always, almost always, a gross oversimplification, right? They will, the observers will take a few obvious aspects of the community that have come into the public domain, distill it down to a gross oversimplification, and generalize to hell and back. And this is one of the prices that you pay. You can't help it. That's just how it is, right? So here's a few examples of gross oversimplification. Haskell community, good at math. Ruby community does web apps. Python guys, scientific computing. I can go on in this way. And obviously there are more for each of these communities, but these are just simple examples. Now this is more of me trying to set expectations. I've seen people get frustrated at this. Now why do people think Ruby is slow? It's not slow anymore. That was 5 years ago. That's how it goes. So having gotten past, I think, the what, the how, and for whom part of it, let's talk a little bit about what it takes to build a community, because I'm fairly sure that most of you are either part of or will in the future be a part of a community in your company or area. You're probably, I think it's a good guess that you guys in this audience are among the most aggressive, if that's the right term, people when it comes to DevOps, because you're here. Now either that or you live very close to this venue in Bangalore and are single. Right? Because it's not easy to make it for something on a Saturday morning in Bangalore. But here you are. So let's talk a little bit about what it takes to build community, because I suspect it will be useful to you in the future. So the first step is getting started, obviously. You're going to set up a Google group. You're going to have 3 colleagues in office who are interested in the same stuff you are. Maybe it's Lua, maybe it's DevOps, maybe somebody wants to use Puppet and doesn't know how, and you do, and you get started. So I'm going to give you like a set of bullet points almost that have worked for me as mechanics. Always with the community, keep an eye on at least one, preferably exactly one stakeholder out of their entire ecosystem. Identify one stakeholder, identify one problem, and make sure that your group is focused on solving that, right? If it is, it could be a bunch of things. Maybe there are companies that are struggling to hire, but most usually it's this, right? New community usually means a technology or a philosophy or a combination that is new, and people are looking to learn. Now making sure that this learning is being facilitated is probably like the best way to start a community. Focus on learning. Step 2, dedicate time and be systematic. Now this is one of those things which I've always struggled with, because it's really hard when you're trying to grow a community to juggle work, home, and now you have this other thing. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of being dependable and reliable. You must have regular meetups. You must have lists that are active where someone asks a question, the question is answered, hopefully politely and nicely. And keeping to a regular schedule, being predictable. If you say that we're going to do second Saturday of every month, do second Saturday of every month. Don't let it slide. Because when you let it slide, it's probably the worst thing that can happen. I'm sure there are a bunch of reasons, but this is just me speaking in terms of what I've observed. That nothing kills a nascent community that's trying to get off the ground faster than missing meetups. Step 3, identify and promote contributors. Now remember, at this scale we're talking about a community or a sub-community that is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people strong. I'm not talking about something that has critical mass in terms of 50, 100, 200 people across the city, where you can say, let's have a meetup, and 10 guys are going to show, because 1 in 20 will show up. You don't have that confidence. So in this small nascent stage, recognize who is willing to commit the time and make the effort, because this is non-trivial, frankly, and promote them. It's extremely important. Keep in mind that communities, again, are about reputation and value, right? And promoting the people that are putting in the effort bolsters their reputation and will help them facilitate the movement of value. So this is not, I'm actually tying this back into the previous point. So there are multiple ways to recognize contributions. Now here are some of the most obvious, right? People that are sitting on IRC answering questions, thankless job. But there are people that do that. Open source contributors, businesses that sponsor conferences, or those businesses which give us rooms to meet up in. This is not a joke, it's hard, and that's why there are so few companies doing it. And I think it's worthwhile recognizing the ones that do. And of course, the last and most nebulous one is customers that swear by whatever you're doing. And I think it's a rinse-repeat cycle for these 3 points until you reach a certain scale, at which point you're trying to get the community off the ground, get it up to a situation like maybe where we are in today, where we have 150 people in a room. Now, to me, the most important thing at this point is identifying the value chain. That is, who are the stakeholders and how are they benefiting from the community? You can't facilitate the movement of value if you don't know what it is that the members of your community value. So recognize what is the value, what is it that people are looking for. Do they want to recruit? Are they having trouble learning? Do they have technical problems that your technology is going to solve? Do they have business problems that the technology or philosophy is going to solve? What exactly is it that the members of the community are looking for? Step 5, marketing. I think this is one of those things that just always gets ignored. Most stakeholders will not even know that you exist. You could be potentially very useful to them and so on and so forth. But if they don't know who you are, they don't know that you can help them, they won't come to you and your community won't grow. So help them understand what value you can provide as a community, what value they can put back into the community, and it creates a very positive feedback loop. And then of course we come to the real, at least in my opinion, value of a community, which is actively start facilitating the bartering of value. Right? Start helping the members of your community to step in to solve problems for all the stakeholders. Help companies recruit. Introduce job seekers to people looking for contract employees. Right? Help conferences find sponsors. Find companies that are willing to provide space. Make sure your mailing lists are being curated well. Make sure there's an IRC channel that's up with somebody in it all the time. The scale at which you operate is completely dependent on the scale of your community and the nature of the problems. But actively concentrating on this is important. And one of the things that I've noticed small communities struggle with, because typically small communities will mostly stay digital. There'll be a core group of 1 or 2 people that were colleagues or whatever, and then most people will be on a mailing list, is we tend to underestimate the value of face-to-face interaction. And even if you couldn't do regular meetups before because you didn't have a quorum, because the second Saturday of every month only 2 people are free, at some point that won't be true. And when that happens, make sure that you support face-to-face integration. And this is one of those points which I think is a little sensitive at that time, which is that you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of effort, you've reached a certain point. I think it's most commonly seen in open source projects. But now, for whatever reason, you just don't have the time anymore. Don't hang on. If you've been doing this right, you already know who are the other people in the community who are willing to do the job you were. So support them. Pass on the baton. Let them take over. Don't cling on. It's okay. Communities will have different people driving them at different points in time. It's totally cool. And this is pretty much what I had to talk about. I have a few comments on 3 aspects. So patience is a very important factor. Communities are never perfect. I can assure you that you get onto IRC for any community and there will be somebody there that will piss you off. Right? It's for sure. There will be some aspect of how people behave. Maybe someone's being sexist. Maybe someone's just being rude. You know. Keep in mind that ecosystems will actually seek equilibrium. I'm sorry, I just like this movie too much, so I couldn't resist. But equilibriums are, an equilibrium state is where things are working, everyone's happy with what's going on. But it's not necessarily good or necessarily bad, it just is. And once things are in equilibrium, they change slowly. So therefore communities will change slowly. Especially if you're going to join an existing community and you see things that make you uncomfortable or you don't like or that you think you could be better, that could be improved, please be patient. Don't expect anything to change in one day. It takes time. Most successful communities will take years to build. I said this earlier. I think the Bangalore Ruby community today is fairly stable, but it's still a far cry from what I've seen in, for example, the Bay Area, where they are able to do 3 different meetups in that area every month. But patience is really called for. It's been 6 years now. It will probably be another 5 or 6 before we reach that scale. That's okay. A note on culture. The culture of a community is determined by the examples that are set. You can have a community that is extremely unfriendly and extremely nasty, and that's going to go nowhere really fast. And that just depends on the first people in, what they do, and how they behave with other people. So rude people will beget rude communities, elitists will beget elitist communities, and nice people will beget nice communities. Now, you have to pick that combination of attributes that you care about, that you would like your community to reflect, and make sure that you are being a role model. And this can be really hard. For someone like me, regular meetups, that's why I harp on it so much. Making regular meetups happen has been an almost impossible task for me. But that's how it goes. My personal favorite in terms of culture, again, going back to the Ruby community because that's what I'm familiar with. I don't know how many of you have heard this term before, Min Swan? New? One hand. Okay, so the one thing I love about this community is I never really met anybody that was nasty to me, even when I asked the dumbest of questions. I mean, at worst, I would say that someone was curt. And that person has a reputation for being curt. Like people are like, oh yeah, that guy, that's okay, you're going to have a hard time. But 99 people out of 100 were just super nice, like ridiculously, awesomely nice. And I realized that it's because Marx is nice and people take it very seriously. They're like, he's a nice guy, he has zero ego, he's willing to be nice. And that willingness to be nice is percolated through the whole community. I think it's a great example. And again, I also think that nice people are just easy to deal with. So given that we're in the business of facilitating a conversation and the movement of value, being nice goes a long way. It's also worth noting that the larger the community, the more entrenched the culture. And this ties back to my patience section earlier, where if you're moving into a large community, be aware that the culture is going to be entrenched and it will take time if you want to change it. Keep in mind that you don't want to encourage the super user behavior. This isn't an ego trip. This isn't about making yourself feel powerful or making yourself feel good. Because you won't be able to pass on the baton, you will struggle to be nice, you will struggle to facilitate. Be flexible, avoid ego trips, right? You don't actually have a pseudo, and I've seen this all too often that people think there is some sort of pseudo command in a user group which allows them to do whatever, and that's just not true. And lastly, set the right example early. I think that early part is important because when you set whatever you seed the community with, it will show those traits years later. There's a reason why PHP has such really bad variable naming conventions, and nobody's able to change it now. It's been what, like 2 decades? So things like this matter. They will have ripple effects that spread out across a time frame that you may not even be contemplating today. And lastly, a note on marketing. Build it and they will come as a fallacy, whether you're talking about software or whether you're talking about communities. The assumption that because there is this obvious source of value, or obvious to us because we built it, the assumption that other people will see that value and come in is a fallacy. That's not true. we tend to, just like I said earlier about money, we almost always have this entrenched dislike of marketing. We think it's unnecessary. Not true. There is marketing and there is marketing. And when you really have something useful to contribute, it is important to express that and make sure that you're tailoring it to the people that care. So strive to understand what the problems of your stakeholders are. This is going to change from year to year. It's not going to be the same. So it's important to keep an eye on what it is that, I mentioned this earlier, when you start out, start by solving a real problem. But you have to keep solving a real problem, and what is a real problem is mutable. It's going to keep changing over time. Express how your community can help solve these problems very clearly. A favorite example of mine is the Rails scaffolding demo. Now, this is the sad part about marketing that pisses most people off, but the most effective marketing is one which grossly oversimplifies. Right? Now, we all know, at least those of you that are on the website, know that that demo was complete BS. You're not actually going to build a real production-grade blogging engine, which is what the demo was about, how to build a blog engine in 30 seconds or something faffy like that. But it really took off, and I think it was one of those videos which really drove the growth of the community. It's crazy, but I personally would point to that one video as being the thing that started so much of this. So in conclusion, communities exist for and because of stakeholders. And the stakeholders are more than just the hackers. The hackers, I would say, are the majority, but ignoring the others is detrimental. So businesses and customers are a part of the community too. We should not ignore this fact. Communities exist to facilitate the bartering of value. They exist to make it easy for stakeholders to interact with each other. Effective facilitation depends on trust. Trust depends on reputation. And building a reputation takes time and marketing. So that's my talk. Questions? And of course, I was also going to pull up both Ajay and Niranjan. If you guys want to ask questions very specifically about the DevOps community, because I don't work full-time on this, they do. So if you have any questions about it, we'll just pull them on. So, yeah. No questions at all? My God, that must be the best talk I've ever given.